You're in the water loop.
Water loop, water loop, water loop.
Okay. Hi, you're in the water loop. This is Travis, and I'm here with Ryan Bigelow. He is a senior program manager with the Seafood Watch at Monterey Bay Aquarium. Ryan, glad we connect to talk.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Glad to speak with you.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm familiar with Seafood Watch. I've seen the little guide in all my visits to aquariums. I used to go to the National Aquarium in Baltimore all the time. They always had your guide there.
Yep.
But for people that aren't familiar with Seafood Watch, what is it? What's it about?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll take us all the way back to 1997.
Let's do it.
The Monterey Bay Aquarium was having a special exhibit called Fishing for Solutions. It was all about some of the issues associated with unsustainable fishing, things like bycatch, catching too many fish, things like that. It was a very basic, very introductory sort of core exhibit on that issue. And it was really, really popular. So much so that we started to release some of our buying information as these little plastic tabletop tents, almost like a happy hour menu.
Okay.
And we put those in our restaurant, the restaurant at the aquarium, and they started disappearing. And when people are stealing things, if you have demand. So the science that we pulled together for that exhibit, the demand that we knew was there, we sort of combined those and started the Seafood Watch program October 20th, 1999. So 20 years ago this year.
All right.
And it's just really blossomed from there. It started out as a very simple traffic light system. Buy this, don't buy that. And it has just grown over time. We still continue to work with customers. We still continue, or consumers rather. We still work with zoos and aquariums around the country to spread the message. But more and more, we're also using that base that we built through consumer support to work with the biggest names in industry, governments throughout the world, and really trying to improve the state of the ocean.
Yeah, and so someone that picks up the Seafood Watch, whatever you want to call that, the little guide, it's great because it's designed to fit right in your wallet, right? Or in your pocket, easy to carry with you. And you guys have an app also, which I downloaded. So if somebody opens that up, what are they seeing now 20 years after you guys launched?
They're seeing a lot more information, and they're seeing a lot of information that's held to a much higher level of scientific rigor. Everything on our guides is all peer-reviewed and really held up, looked at by industry and academics as well. But if you pick up the Pocket Guide, for example, you're looking at a subset of all the recommendations we have. We have something like 1,500 now, different recommendations for over 300 species. They're caught in different ways and caught in different locations, so they have different recommendations. But really trying to give the average shopper a little view into how complicated seafood can be and help them make decisions when they're at the store. And we found, even just as importantly, consumers getting out that guide and waving it around in front of a fishmonger is incredibly helpful. So just that action alone has been very helpful.
Yeah, interesting. So, I have, like I said, I have the app on here, and I want to go in and see. It still has like that green, yellow, red there, right?
Yeah.
Next to different fish. So what the green means, this is sustainable. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So the three levels are green, best choice. These are really your best performers. They can be farmed and wild, which is surprising to many people that we take an agnostic view on that. If you can farm really, really well, if you can use a trawl really, really well, then you might be a best choice. Now, some of those things, for example, like using a trawl, a little more difficult, but it's possible.
Okay.
Then that next level down is a good alternative. These are products that we let our business partners buy. They're still doing pretty well, but there might be one or two issues, maybe with management, maybe there's a little bit of bycatch, maybe there's something there that needs to be improved before we'd really give it that stamp of green best choice. And then at the bottom end, you have the red avoids. And these are things where there's serious issues, which as a conservation organization, we really ask that you stop and think about.
The whole idea is when we're using this word sustainable, we're talking about overfishing, or hey, we're going to deplete this particular species of fish to where it's not sustainable anymore. The fishery is going to collapse, or it's a red because it's already in a bad state. That's kind of what we're really getting at here, making sure that the population of that particular type of fish or whatever it might be is at a sustainable, healthy level. It's that simple.
Yes, that's excuse me.
That's all right.
Yes, that is absolutely right. And even that definition of what's sustainable has really evolved over time. In the sense that all those things you just mentioned, if we're catching too many of them, that's always going to be a sustainability issue. But even starting to look more at things like, well, what about the communities that are catching these fish? Are there slaves involved with this? What's the carbon footprint of the fish? And we don't have all the answers to those questions yet, but that's absolutely that next level of that the sustainability community, I think, is really grappling with and starting to look at.
Is all that science, I mean, that's really housed there at the Monterey Bay Aquarium? I mean, kind of the staff, and I mean, you're relying on other sources and documents and research that's super credible, but you guys, it sounds like like you said, the rigor that's going into it is pretty amazing now.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, 10 years ago, I can't give you an exact number, but I would say the majority of the reports were probably written in-house. But the United States imports 90% of our seafood. And so we more and more are doing reports on fisheries around the entire world. And when we do that, if we're looking at a swimming crab in Southeast Asia, then you really need someone on the ground who knows the industry, who speaks the language. And so we have a team of 40 to 50 analysts around the world, contract analysts who do a bunch of work for us. That comes back to our team of scientists, and there's probably 10 to 15 of them, and they do that final report, make sure everything is up to par, and then we send it out for peer review. So if it's a big important report, we might still do it in-house, but yeah, there's a large team internationally that supports our work now.
Okay. Well, the statistic you gave really jumped out at me. The idea that 90% of the seafood consumed in the U.S. is imported from outside of the U.S., meaning
yes.
Not caught in U.S. waters and not by U.S. commercial fishermen or companies, huh?
Exactly.
I would never have guessed it was that high,
Yeah, and it raises some really interesting questions, especially out here on the West Coast, we get a lot of feedback from people who say, well, I just buy wild caught American. And that's great. And in truth, that does tend to be a pretty solid option. Our fisheries are pretty well managed. Mm-hmm. But if you step back, if you're like me, you love the ocean, you want everyone to be able to enjoy it, that solution isn't going to work it's never going to work for the majority of our country. We're not catching fish at that level. And if we were, the sustainability might come into question. So as fellow ocean lovers, we really have to come together and think about what our solutions are, maybe open up what we're willing to eat and think about it a bit more broadly.
Interesting. Has another side question.
Sure.
Has the amount of seafoods Americans are consuming, how is that trending?
That's going up per capita, which is good. It does fluctuate, so that it might be, dropping down a little bit right now. I can't say for certain, but we do eat quite a bit of seafood. And even more importantly, there's just more people. So throughout, in the United States and of course globally. So that's another, kind of jumping around here a little bit. But the other thing is, do people like to eat farm seafood in the United States? Frequently, the answer is no, they don't want to eat it. But if we're going to continue to eat seafood, and if there's going to be 9 billion of us, then we have to really start to figure out how to do farming well.
Yeah. So let's get into, I guess, some of the actual recommendations. Sure. I know one of the cool things is you let people localize. They can kind of look in their region or part of the country at what more sustainable or least sustainable are. But if you're just going to look nationally, right? Yeah. What are the most sustainable seafood choices that people could make?
It's a really good question, and the only really straight black and white answer is look for shellfish, look for farm shellfish. And you really don't have to look for farmed. The vast majority of the farm shellfish you get, shellfish that you eat is going to be farmed. Your oysters, your clams, that's almost all farmed. And that's an animal that really enjoys being packed in tight space, doesn't need a lot of food, doesn't like antibiotics, can leave the water cleaner than it was when it went into the water. So, that's a really green, environmentally sustainable way to get our protein.
Okay. So mussels, clams, oysters.
Yeah, for the most part, those are just a solid choice. And then, of course, not many people consider this, but seaweeds as well. Those are also great sources. When you're looking for that really good, salty ocean taste, that really fresh ocean taste, a really high-end seaweed, a farm seaweed. We've got some really good farm seaweed, even from the United States. It's great. So if you just want that taste, that's another way to go about doing it. And then as you go more broadly, as you start to get into the items that Americans just love, right? The salmons and the shrimps and the tunas of the world, that's when you need to start to be a little bit more careful. And it's much more difficult to just broad brush say, this is all good, this is all bad. There's very few examples of that. What you really need to do is know, one, most simply, is the place I'm shopping at committed to sustainable seafood? Do they have some sort of commitment? Those run the gamut. And businesses find themselves on different points of that spectrum. But finding a business that has made some sort of commitment is a powerful first step. If you want to go that extra step and say, I'm here because you made that commitment, that means something to me, then we thank you, because that is very powerful as well.
That's going to be good feedback for them to hear, is to actually their customers care about that. Yeah.
Huh. And depending on where you are in the country, there's our program, there's other programs, but our app has our list of restaurant partners on there. Everyone from Red Lobster to Whole Foods, the entire gamut of businesses are on there that have made these really strong commitments. So that's the easiest first step. Once you get past that, and you need to start asking questions about the seafood on your plate. Where was it caught? How was it caught? And unfortunately, what species is it? I say unfortunately because you'd think that should be pretty clear. But if you're getting the fish and chips, you might not have any idea.
Sure. Well, interesting. So those are the three. I mean, shrimp, tuna, and oh boy, how can I be going blank there? Salmon, right? Like
yes.
That's what you hear about.
Yep.
So are some of those still on the most sustainable side? Are they still green? Are there,
Some of them, sure, and that's the difficulty, right? Now, our organization has been around so long, we have recommendations, like I said, for well over 1,000 different seafood items. You're going to have green, yellow, and red for all of them.
Uh-huh.
So those extreme examples where everything's red or everything's green are very few and far between. Farm salmon's maybe a really good example. Farm salmon, if you look at the total volume that we import or that we consume, even most of it's still in the red, but there are green or yellow options for every type of farming out there. So that's the mixed message. It's really hard to share with people because, we're all busy. Who has a lot of time to really dig into their seafood choices? It's tough. But at the end of the day, the positive message that I choose to take out of that is we are going to farm salmon because we eat a lot of it, and it gets a good price for businesses. So if that is going to continue, it's good to know that these best performers are showing that it can be done well. Mm-hmm. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. We're not there yet, not by a long stretch, but we can get there.
I mean, I think you see it happening across our society where people are more conscious about environmental issues and sustainability, and and what they're eating and where their food is coming from. So it does take effort, but I feel like a lot of people are putting in that effort, right? You're seeing it more and more. So it's a trending that way.
Yeah.
So, people like Alaskan wild caught salmon, that's like something you hear a lot about. What's the deal with that one?
Yeah, Alaska, they have an amazing fishery, and they really sort of set the bar for sustainability in many ways. They've gone ahead and had, I think at this point, the vast majority of it, if not all of it, is MSC certified. So MSC is the Marine Stewardship Council. Okay. That's a pretty high bar for sustainability, and we actually defer to them. So if you have that certification, you're good to go. We tell our business partners to buy you. We tell consumers to look for that product. So Alaskan salmon still continues to be something we would recommend consumers buy.
Okay.
That is the whole. It's a topic for another day, but an amazing story about how that fishery has evolved and gone from sort of that most dangerous catch kind of every man from his self fishery to a very well managed environmentally responsible fishery. So that's an interesting part of the world.
And it's a big economic driver for that, for Alaska and those folks up there. So they've got a lot of that incentive to manage it well also, right?
Absolutely.
Tuna. I mean, people hear tuna, and maybe not everyone realizes all the different species there are of tuna, right?
Yeah.
You've got your classic can of tuna. What's typically in, that can of tuna on the shelf?
Well, usually it's going to be albacore. That's what the American consumer really likes. That's your, sort of, it's got a white flavor, not as fishy. In
Hmm.
Europe, you're going to see more skipjack, which is a smaller tuna, tastes a little fishier. Not overly so, but a bit. And those are the two main ones. But the problem with canned tuna is you can't always be certain that that's A, the only species in there, and B, that it's only tuna in there.
Mm.
Now, I don't mean to imply that happens all the time, but it can happen. Um, and canned tuna for a long time in our community was sort of like unless you buy the really high end pull and line caught American stuff, just don't do it. Was sort of the, at least in our office, you'd see very few people who would be buying canned tuna and certainly not bringing it in for lunch. But now, Safeway and others have made really good commitments, and you can get affordable canned tuna that is pretty sustainably caught.
Okay.
That's a huge move and a huge step forward for us, because there's always been this perception that sustainable seafood is too expensive.
Yeah.
And admittedly, it can be expensive, but the most expensive species still continue to be the least sustainable.
Mm.
So, your bluefin tuna, your eel, other things. I've taken us off the tuna.
No,
You're absolutely right.
all...
Tuna is super complicated. The only one I would say 100% do not eat at this point is bluefin tuna.
Okay.
It's tough because that's what you're going to get, and it's delicious. Maybe too delicious for its own good. It's where you're going to get it in sushi restaurants mostly.
Yeah.
But outside of that, just make sure you're making an informed purchase. There's better options for albacore. There's better options for skipjack. That might be the first thing I'd say is if you're going to be making a tuna salad, go ahead and try the skipjack. And see if you like that. Like I said, it's a smaller fish, so it tends to be a bit more sustainable to catch. So yeah, there's quite a few options out there, and do look for those sustainable, low-priced options as well.
Okay. And I know one of the issues with the tuna, was kind of getting the bycatch with the dolphins and all that stuff for a long time ago. But that was a couple decades ago, I guess, where that was in the public, in the news, and that changes had to be made to address that, to make, the Dolphin Safe kind of label on cans, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because the Dolphin Safe label is often interpreted as this product is sustainable. But in reality, the laws around setting nets on dolphins, which is effectively where that comes from, is dolphins are really good at finding tuna, and if you set a net on a dolphin pod, it's possible you'll catch the tuna as well. Was one part of it. There's other ways that they can get involved with the hooks and things, but yeah, and that's now law. So all tuna in the United States should technically be tuna safe. So while it's nice that it's on the logo, it's a little bit. It should be assumed. It's not.
It doesn't have to do with the sustainability of the fishery. That's just kind of the dolphin issue there.
Yeah, which is great, but just one component.
Yeah. Shrimp. So shrimp's super popular.
Yes.
Where is the sustainable shrimp fishery? What are you going to try to look for for shrimp?
Well, right off the bat, if you in certain parts of the United States, way back to early in our conversation when you mentioned the regional aspect of seafood, there are certain parts of the country, particularly around the Gulf, where you might be able to get Gulf shrimp. That isn't available to most of the public, right? It's a product that's very expensive, very delicious, pretty high bar for sustainability, but that's probably the only wild caught. Remember the day when I realized there were no wild shrimp recommendations on one of our guides, because it's all farmed now.
Wow.
90+% is farmed, and so those farmed recommendations are really what's important.
Okay.
And I think everyone's seen, the horror stories of mangroves being cut down and things like that. And much like the shrimp story, like the salmon story, most of their shrimp is still in the red. That's true.
Wow.
But there are people who are doing it better. There are big companies that are making commitments, because frankly, if you want to sell shrimp to the United States, if you want to sell it to Europe, other parts of the global north, if you will, where we have the money to pay for more sustainable products, you need to. It's almost to get into that market, you need to have that level, and that's mostly thanks to U.S. consumers and how they push businesses.
That's interesting about shrimp really being predominantly over in the red as a sustainability concern. But
Yeah.
I say that because like it seems like Americans eat a lot of shrimp.
Oh,
like, you know?
we eat a lot of shrimp.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why. I mean, if we say, I eat seafood, so and I try to eat it responsibly. But if we say we want to have an animal raised on the other side of the world for the lowest possible price, and we want to eat it in vast quantities, it becomes very difficult to do that sustainably.
Sure.
It's that whole, you can have it fast, you can have it good, or you can have it cheap. That choose two or
Right.
whatever that's you can't have all of these things. You can have to choose, and so we've chosen cheap and plentiful. So now we need to pull that back and have it be more sustainable.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting there on a lot of fronts, but the fight certainly isn't over.
Plus, you're transporting that stuff like around the globe, right? And you've got the the greenhouse gas emissions of that stuff too.
Well,
right?
and that's another interesting thing too. And we've last year we released the carbon emissions tool that you can see online, and I can send you the link later if you'd like, to help people look at the carbon footprint of the seafood they're eating. And one of the things we found is that many times, especially with a commodity like shrimp, where they're shipping vast quantities over, the carbon footprint isn't as bad as you might imagine.
Okay.
Now, if you're dropping, say, salmon from New Zealand on a plane and flying it to my plate, then the carbon footprint is absurd.
Yeah.
But if it's 100 tons, 1,000 tons of shrimp on a boat coming over, the per pound carbon footprint is very low.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
But it sounds like, again, going back to what I brought up, it's really important for people to probably use the app and put in where they live and get that local information as possible. To help guide their choices.
Yeah, I think the biggest, you're absolutely right. I'm from Ohio originally, and so we didn't have a lot of access to local seafood. It was a lot of sport fisheries, things like that. But if you're on a coast or you're near a lake where there is some sort of fishery, first off, there's no guarantee that just because something is local that it is sustainable. However, it gives you that opportunity to form a relationship, to meet fishermen, to meet people. For example, again, I know we're in a special situation here, but I can walk out to the wharf and talk to the person who's unloading the boats.
Yeah.
That's not representative of the country, I get, but I can have that conversation. If you can have a conversation, that's the first step towards truly sustainable products. If you're not at a part of the country where that's not, if you're in Ohio, or if you're in North Dakota, if you're in one of those areas, then the first step is to see what restaurants around you have made commitments.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Outside of a few items, what will they eat across the country doesn't change all that much.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very interesting. I live in Wilmington, North Carolina, so I'm at the coast here. Yep. And you go to restaurants and you see a lot of mahi. Yes. You see a lot of red snapper.
Yes.
There's a lot of shellfish around here that I think is more from the area. Crab and all that. Blue crabs, I think they get in the Sound. So I'm originally from Maryland also. Chesapeake Bay, blue crabs, that's like ingrained in the culture.
Yes.
But the population of blue crabs in the bay is something that's really tracked and reported on every year, and they've changed a lot of the harvesting restrictions and policies to try to keep that population sustainable. So that's an interesting one. What's really problematic? What are like the species, I guess, that are in the red that gives you the most concern, or that's really and is the pressure just way too much and it's got to be changed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the two that I mentioned earlier, bluefin and eel.
Okay.
If you're going to talk to someone who you think's only going to make one change, right? If you only got that much of their bandwidth, say when you get sushi, don't get unagi, don't get homaguro or kuro maguro, it's often called as well. Don't buy those.
Okay.
Which is tough because those are so delicious, but that's sort of the baseline there. And then I think the area that causes me the most concern keeps me up at night is really about the other species we've talked about, those central salmon, shrimp, and tuna, and the amounts we consume.
Yeah.
There's a lot of room for hope in there. Like we've talked about, there's some really good farming operations coming on board. And that's all good news. But I would really hope that Americans, because we do have the money to buy different species, that we try new things.
Sure.
And sort of spread out our love for seafood, make our net a little wider, as it were, catch a few different things, try new things. Because there are really good products out there. One example, rockfish on our coast. You know, it was very popular for a time. The fishery was closed for environmental concerns. When that whitefish disappeared, tilapia came on board, very cheap from China, and now that fishery is back. It's healthy, and it's difficult to compete with these lower priced items. But rockfish is delicious, and rockfish tacos are amazing. And so I really hope that we can get American consumers to be courageous and get out there and try new things.
Yeah, well, again, in the Chesapeake Bay area, you know, rockfish, striped bass, whatever, that was, if we're talking about the same fish, I imagine that, you know, definitely popular.
Similar.
I saw rockfish tacos all over menus around there and everything. So
and delicious, right? Like
really? Yeah, totally. So if somebody wants tuna when they're getting sushi and they're like, no bluefin, what's an alternative maybe?
Well, you're going to see a lot of other species on there. You might see albacore. You might see. So here's the trick for this. If they're selling you bluefin tuna because it's so much more expensive, they're going to market as such. And the Japanese eat so many different types of seafood. Depending on the sushi restaurant you're in, you could have a variety of different tunas on your plate, lots of different options, which is great. But you're going to have to find out what species it is and then learn a little bit more about it.
Okay.
Where was it caught? How was it caught? That kind of thing. And surprisingly, if you're in a good sushi restaurant, that's the place where they very well may have that information because they really care about the fish that they're selling you.
Sure.
Now, if you're just going out for cheap sushi and, you know, running in for the $10 all-you-can-eat lunch, it might be a different question, and you might want to just try some different things. But yeah, it's often that's a decision consumers have to make. You know, I've heard people say, I couldn't decide which tuna to get, so I got the chicken, which isn't where I want to push consumers either, right? I'd much rather have you end up at a different place with your purchases, but take some knowing.
Two other specific types of seafood to ask you about. Chilean sea bass, right?
Yes.
Like I think this was like super popular. I mean, it still probably is, but I know it kind of came on the scene, a decade ago or 15 years ago.
Yep.
I think they took some undesirable fish or whatever and named it Chilean sea bass.
Yes.
And I don't think that fishery is in great shape. Is that correct?
Well, what an interesting story. That Patagonian toothfish, that's the actual name of the fish. So yes, but everything you said is accurate. It really got overfished pretty quickly. There have been a couple fisheries that have come on and actually worked really hard to get the MSC certification that we talked about earlier. So if you can find those options, for example, Whole Foods I know sells it, other locations sell it because of their partnership with us. But if you can find that MSC mark on Chilean sea bass, go ahead and get it because it is delicious. But otherwise, it's one we'd ask that you avoid.
Okay, so that MSC is you'll actually see a seafood can get labeled with that on there, huh?
Yeah, which is it's very it's exactly right.
Okay. The other one I wanted to ask you about is lionfish. And this was an invasive species that found its way kind of to the Caribbean and the mid-Atlantic, and it's just like it's got no predators and it's just taken off, and it's kind of been a big nuisance. And there's an effort underway to get people to eat that, so that then there's some fishery pressure on it. And I think I saw that on one of your lists as something that's, hey, yes, make this choice, right?
Eat it all. Yeah, that's it. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to have it. It's delicious.
I have not.
It's just a really firm whitefish, so it's perfect for the American consumer. You know, it doesn't have a fishy flavor. You know, for some reason, we really like meat-eating fish, right? So the salmon, the tuna, that's what really appeals to our palate. And Lionfish falls right into that. They're a predator. They're difficult to catch. They can be, because they cover they're really deep now. The scientists have found much deeper than we thought they were previously, but absolutely eat as many as you can get your hands on. I recommend them deep fried.
Deep fried. I like it. So I think we talked about this a little bit, but the grocery store thing, the restaurant thing, how often do you find people struggling to get answers from the person behind the counter, or at the restaurant? I mean, because people can ask, but it's tough, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think this happens much more frequently than we'd like it to happen. Even if you have, if we partner with some of the largest chains in the country and sometimes in the world, if the waiter or waitress or the fishmonger you happen to grab hasn't heard about that commitment in a company of 60,000 people, right, it's entirely possible they can answer your question. So, or if the information wasn't written on the box properly, or a whole variety of situations that really lead the consumer to not be able to get their answers they need. That's why I really suggest that you look for businesses made a commitment that you're comfortable with. If you go to a Whole Foods or any of these other partners that we have, if you're ordering from Blue Apron, if you're on a college campus and they're using Compass Group or one of these other food service providers, then you don't have to ask those questions, and that's the easiest way, because again, you're frequently not going to be able to get the answers you need.
Otherwise. Yeah. Well, I guess I want to dig into that side of things a little bit, kind of your partnerships with restaurants and businesses, and I just kind of want to hear how that works. You guys go out there and individual restaurants say, "Hey, we want to be part of this," or how does it work at the restaurant level?
Yeah, so at the restaurant level, ironically enough, it's the strictest level, because they usually have the fewest products they need to move around. So if you're a small restaurant, Chuck's Crab Shack down here on the wharf, whatever it may be, you come to us, you provide all of your purchasing information. We have a special database that you put that information into. We check it out. We make sure that it all meets our standards. If not, we try to help, okay, this shrimp doesn't make it, try this one, et cetera. And we work for that. And before we announce you as a partner, you have to have gotten rid of all red rated avoid items.
Okay.
And that's a little,
that's tough. It can be tougher. It can take time. It's a process, right?
Yeah, it can. And it's when you're talking about the average restaurant in America, if you're just a one-off, if that's the only restaurant you have, it's not like you have a sustainability coordinator on site who can do this for you. It's the chef, it's the owner, it's an employee who really just cares about sustainability. So it's a big ask, and I am always very moved when businesses do that work to get on board.
Yeah, and so you guys announce them as a partner, and then that's something that they can they can promote as they advertise their restaurant and so forth. Let people know. Yeah. Okay. And then what about the supplier side or the grocery store side or the seafood, distributor?
Yeah, distributor. Well, there's a couple different things in there. If you're let's say you're a large chain or a large you're Red Lobster, you're Whole Foods, you're one of these really Aramark, Compass, Disney, one of these big groups that's chosen to make a commitment with us. It's a different type of thing. So we'll work with you over time. Someone like a Red Lobster or Blue Apron, we can actually work with them. We can go with them, literally get on a plane, go to Southeast Asia and say, we can tell you how to fix your farming method. Oh, and by the way, this lady here buys all of your product. And she's not going to buy it anymore unless you do.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at right now.
Okay.
And we're able to make, we've just made a big commitment with Thai Union, which is Chicken of the Sea, other organizations, Minfu, some of the largest seafood producers and suppliers in the world, to help them make improvements. Are they perfect yet? No. So that's the difference between that and a restaurant. But they're really working on it, and they're trying to bring their products forward. And the benefit to the oceans are such that we're willing to make those long-term commitments. It's usually 5 to 10 years, by which point they have to reach that same level that the restaurant had to reach immediately.
Okay.
So, and then on the other end, suppliers, producers, those relationships are always a little bit different. Suppliers, we just ask that they share all their information. So because it's so hard for restaurants and others to often get that information, the same way it's tough for a consumer, that just for them to have them list, even if it's red rated, to say, yeah, if you're a Seafood Watch partner, you're not going to want to buy this. And we found that to be most effective.
Interesting transparency there.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool though, what you've about working with some of these big entities and you guys actually like, okay, let's invest time and resources in looking at what's sustainable and traveling to the places where the seafood's caught. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's been very exciting. I'm amazed how much time we spend in Indonesia and Vietnam now. It's substantial.
Yeah. Is there movement toward more of these big entities trying to look at sustainable options and being part of this?
Absolutely. It's we're working with groups now that 20 years ago when we started absolutely wouldn't have come to the table. And again, that's just been that buildup of consumer support, restaurant support, chef support, and now working with the largest companies in North America, they can really push us into relationships with these producers, suppliers, et cetera, and starting to see a lot of change and a lot of interest.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, as long as the financial aspects, the economic aspects are there, people don't want to be unsustainable.
Sure.
It's easy to paint that brush on corporations that they're big and evil and greedy, but that's not always the case, right? And they're often interested in it if you can make it economically viable for them to do so.
Yeah.
And more, if you want to sell in the United States, you need a better product.
Yeah.
So that's been very helpful, that pressure.
I want to circle something from way earlier in the conversation about, farmed seafood and aquaculture. And I don't know what people's perceptions are. Some people think you have to have wild stuff. You can't have things from farms, and that's bad. And there's something wrong with the seafood and the fish. You said you guys are agnostic on that front, but I imagine you hear a lot from people about that, or wanting you to take a particular stance, saying, "Hey, you should be against this or for that." And so, what's that like?
It's a lot of pressure from both sides. Yeah, we hear it from from fishermen, we hear it from farmers, we hear it from consumers. But you're absolutely right. The message we hear mostly from consumers is, I don't eat farmed products. And again, at the individual level, that's a fine choice, to each their own, but that it doesn't scale. It doesn't scale as a solution. And frankly, some of the most sustainable items you're going to be able to buy are farmed. Again, the seaweeds, the shellfish, and then recirculating systems. That's literally pulling fish out of the water and they're in tanks. So there are no escapes. There is no, there's no fish poop going out into the ocean. That you don't have to use very many chemicals because they're not interacting with sea lice or other things, right? So that's one of the cleanest products you can get, environmentally speaking. So farming can be done well, and we honestly, as a society, as a species, we don't really have any choice. Something like 2 billion people rely on seafood as their primary source of protein and as their livelihood. So for you and I, who could just stop eating fish if we wanted to, that's one thing. But if you can't, and again, there's many people who just cannot,
sure.
We have to find more sustainable paths going forward, and aquaculture is certainly part of that.
Yeah, I think about that often, and how a lot of other protein sources, well, all of them, right? Like chicken and pork and beef and all that's from farms. We're not out there just harvesting wild populations of those animals, but seafood has always been the other end of the spectrum, where we're out there just taking out of the ocean. And so that sustainability piece is huge. And that's why I wanted to talk to you. I appreciate it, Ryan, very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Definitely encourage people to download the app. You always have your phone with you when you're at the store or at a restaurant. So take a minute to check it out.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hey, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Take care.
Yep. Bye.
You're in the water loop.